Hey, I'm Ben Fetters with Sovereign SP, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about something really important and super helpful, flow failure management. Having a flow run fail and then not realizing that it failed until hours, days, or maybe even weeks later is bad. So hopefully this video can help you create a system so that you're notified a little faster and in a more organized way so that you can handle flow failures for your company or the company you're doing work for a lot quicker, which of course means everyone is much happier. Which is kind of the end result of using Power Automate. It just helps make people's lives a little easier and a little happier. So, without further delay, let's get started. First off, before I get into everything, what we'll be talking about specifically in this video is the default flow failure management available already, the configure run after settings, which will be very important and is very helpful to understand just in general, and getting error notifications after a specific flow action failure or after any flow action failure. And lastly, including the link to the specific flow run in an email, which is super cool. I was actually really excited when I found out how to do that. So let's get started on looking at the default flow failure management that's already available to us. First off, looking at Power Automate here, I'm going to go over to this other tab, and you'll see I'm looking at the Cloudflow activity. Now, how to get to this spot, we're just going to go over here on the left navigation. If I click on monitor, and then of course there's different types of flows, right? So I got my Cloudflow activity, which is the main one I use, but you've also got desktop and desktop flow queues preview, apparently. Um, Anyways, Cloudflow activity is the main thing that we're going to be looking at, and it's just going to show all the activity for your flows. And this is actually kind of helpful. It can show you, which flows have been running, if they were successful, what's been going on in the Power Automate world here. And you've also got notifications you can take a look at. I don't have any right now. And of course, we're talking about flow failures, so you can also see the failures that occurred, which somehow I don't have any failures as of right now. So as you can imagine, you would be seeing the different flow run failures right here. Just like over here in all activity, you'd probably be seeing or you will be seeing the flow title of the flow, when it failed, etc. So this is sort of helpful, and I know that also Power Automate eventually is going to let you know in an email saying, hey, just so you know, these flows have failed this many times this long ago. But we kind of need to know when flows fail right away, right? I mean, some flows maybe you don't really need to know if they fail. It's not as big of a deal if you find out that they failed uh, a few days ago or something like that. But for the most part, we kind of need to at least be aware of some flow failures right away. And that can either be done through an email, a notification. Um, we're going to be using email for this example. And if we go back right over here, we're going to give a little bit of a document approval workflow demo as my example. And before we get into how to notify of a flow failure, we have to understand first the configure run after settings. So what those are, if I click on these little ellipses on one of these actions right here, I can look at so this will make sense. Let me click on the next one. I'll explain why you can't click on it on the above one. So if I go to configure run after, you'll see that it's saying get document type, which is the action I've clicked on, should run after get file properties, which is the action right above it, succeeded. Now, each action is going to have configure run after settings set up. And basically all it's saying is this action that I've selected is only going to run if the above action, and then it'll look at all these options here. So you can actually select more than one, of course. So if I really wanted to, I could say succeeded or timed out, if the get file properties succeeded or timed out. And then I can click done, and that would of course save that. So if we cancel this, and the reason why really quick this one doesn't have these settings available is because the flow is not really technically going to really run if the very first action failed. That's going to give you a different error on your main screen. If I click back, it's going to say there's a problem with your trigger. We can't get the flow to even start. So this one, you can't really say if the first action timed out or failed or whatever. So hopefully that makes sense. But on all these other actions, we can look at the ellipses, and they're always going to point to the above action and to look at if they succeeded. So just by default, everything, which makes sense, is only going to run if the above action succeeded. So you can kind of get an idea of where we're going to be going with this with the flow failures. But the first thing to understand is what exactly it means for each one of these things, which is quite simple, but we'll just go over it really quick. Of course, if something is successful, we get that green check mark, the above action successfully ran. And then if it's failed, of course, that's obvious there's a problem. It's going to get that red X. But here's where it's a little different. So if an action skipped, that means that two things happened. So I'm going to go over actually to our blog, which will explain this maybe more detail. And if you like to read more than watch a video, I'll put the link to this blog in the description down below. I'll click over here on my blog. Here's the different images. So an action, one of the reasons that an action will be skipped is if it is inside of something like a condition or a switch, right? So there's different branches. The flow is going to either go down this side or the if no side, right? So in this example, our condition, the result was false. So the flow is going to go down the if no branch, and that's why we're seeing these succeeded check marks right here. And you'll notice that the gray X means that these actions were skipped because the flow went down another side of the branch, right? So that's important to understand if you're doing error management. You don't, or you at least want to be careful when adding any, notification email inside of a branch of a condition or a switch control. And the second reason is a little bit more obvious one. So if a action failed, so this action failed, we've got that red exclamation point. I think I said X. Then the below actions, or the actions below the failed action, will be marked as skipped. So now that we've understood that, let's go back here and look at the last one. So if a flow or if the action has timed out, that only, that's more of a rare occurrence. And just to be sure, I would maybe look up the documentation on that. But whenever I've seen that is the flow is trying to do something and it can also almost do it, but it's got a bad connection. And so it, tries a few times and then it just times out. I've rarely gotten that error, but it does happen occasionally. But so you can, with our flow failure management, you can include that if you would like. And I would look at more documentation on exactly when this does occur because, to be honest, I'm not really sure because I've only seen it like one time. So I'll just be honest with you. But now let's talk about how to set up a flow failure email. So when an action fails, so as I said in the beginning, we're going to be talking about whenever a specific action fails, if you want to send an email, or when any action fails. So if the entire flow fails, when are we going to send an email? Or how are we going to send that email? So first off, let's say that my get file metadata action was just one of those actions where I'm pretty sure that I'm more sure that it's going to have a chance of failure. And I really need to know if that messes up, then that's going to mess up a whole bunch of stuff or whatever the reason is, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go right below that action, click on the insert a new step, and instead of add an action, I'm going to actually add a parallel branch. I can choose an action that I would like. We're going to try to send email. It's my favorite one. Go send email. And right now, if I look up or look at the configure run after settings, it's going to say if the get file metadata succeeded. So if I also look at the configure run after settings of this variable, it's going to say if the get file metadata succeeded, of course. So looking at, if you've never used parallel branches before, basically what the flow is going to do is, as of right now, is when it gets to this file metadata action, if it succeeded, based on our configure run after settings, these actions are going to run and this action is going to run. So these two are going to actually try to run at the same time, which is not what we want, of course. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to go over to my configure run after, and instead of having this run if that action is successful, I'm going to say if it has failed or if it somehow has timed out. Now, I'm not doing the is skipped because that action could be skipped if one of these above actions failed, of course, right? Just looking at our blog again. If an above action failed, then the below actions are skipped. So could really do that, but just for this instance, maybe you don't want to be notified of all the flow failures. You just want to be notified of just this one action, which I don't know why you'd really want to do that, but just so you know how to do it, I'm going to include that. So I'll click done, and I'll say to, I can do my email, there we go, flow, maybe I can put the title of my flow, titled document approval workflow failure. There we go. And I can say fail, and we'll put this bold and italics, and there we go. Another thing to remember when using emails is if you want to really be notified quickly, or at least notice your email a little better, is you can go click on show advanced options and importance. We can go over here and click on high, and there we go. So there's our error email. Now in the next error email that we'll be showing, I'll show you how to actually include the link to that current flow run. So if let's imagine you get an email, says a flow run failed, instead of having to go figure out which flow run failed or go back to your flow or anything, you can just click on that link and it'll bring you right to that flow run failure, which is super helpful and really cool. So I'll be showing that in this next step. So let me click out of that. You'll also notice that we've got, instead of a black line like over here, we've got this red dotted line or arrow. And that's showing that something has to fail, right, in order for this to run. Now, the next thing we're going to do is add a error notification email if any of these actions failed. And this is probably the more common usage of what we personally use at our company is this method, which just makes a lot more sense. You just want to be notified of any flow failure, right? But I guess a good point with this is if you wanted to be notified just during this one part right here, you could say failed at the get file metadata data action or something like that. So maybe you want to specifically say, hey, this failed at this action right here. So that might be a better use case for that. But let's move on to the next subject. So we're going to add a new step, and I'll actually just copy this to the clipboard, go to my clipboard, send email. So now we got this little loop here. And what we want to do here, so notice I'm going to put this failure email at the very end of the flow. So if I want to be notified of any failure or anything, I'm going to put this at the very end. And now for my configure run after settings, this time I'm going to say, well, now notice since this is a branch, this is maybe a bad example. Um, I'm seeing this email and the condition since both of these well, they couldn't really both run, but if either of them was successful or failed or whatever, right? So I can actually click that out, and I just want to look at this notification email is only going to run if the condition failed, is skipped, or has timed out. I don't really want to do anything. If this one runs, I just want to, just be done. And of course, this time we're going to add the is skipped. And that means, I'll go back to this picture just because if any action failed during the entire flow process, then all the actions after it are going to be marked as skipped. So in other words, if this action failed, or this one, of course, then eventually all the actions below it are going to be marked as skipped. And that means this condition is going to be marked as skipped. So that's why you do that. But of course, if all these actions succeeded and the condition failed, then I'd want to know that as well. So that's why we have, well, I don't want to take that out. Has failed, is skipped, or in a very rare scenario, or maybe it's not rare according to what you're doing. I don't know what you're doing. Maybe you see that all the time. But we have the has timed out checked as well. So I'll click done. We get that red arrow right there, and we have our failure email. So fail. And the last thing, really quick, before I forget, this is really important, is technically what will happen is if there is a flow failure during this flow run, then of course it's either going to send this email out or this email will get sent out. And technically the last action that will run is either this one or this one, right? So if this email is successful, which assuming it's probably going to be successful, that means the flow run will count as successful. So that's pretty confusing if you're coming back here and you're looking at all the flow runs, which I don't have any, of course. It's going to say this flow run was successful when it really had a failure in it. So that's really confusing. So to get around that, we're going to click edit. And of course, it didn't save anything. That's all right. Go to my clipboard real quick. Click on this, configure run after, has failed, has skipped, has timed out. Click done. And now what we want to do is actually add a new step right here after our failure email. And I'm going to I'm going to type in terminate. And this is an action that says terminate, so it's going to end the flow. This is basically the way to get around that flow run being marked as successful, even though there was an error that occurred, right? So all I'm going to do is just say the status is failed. And this action, of course, will only run when the send email action was successful. And that email action is only going to run if any of these failed, right? So this will mark it as failed, which is what we want it to do. So that's a way to get around that, because it can be confusing when you do set up something like this. You'll have to remember to put this terminate action in here and have the status be set to failed or maybe canceled, depending on what you're wanting to do. So that'll mark the flow as failed, get rid of any confusion, and there we go. So the last thing that we're going to talk about is the adding a link to a specific flow run. So this is a really helpful solution. And let me actually check my blog as it has the specific formula. So I'll go over here to our nice little website here, scroll down a little bit, and here we go. So what you can actually do, this is the great part about this is an expression right here. Let me actually explain this way you can see it a little bit better. Basically what it's going to do, the concat function is just combining all these different, this text and this these different expressions or formulas. And this is text, and then this is text. And what it's going to do is create this link, right? So this is the URL to that specific flow run. Okay, so the workflow, that is actually an expression. So if I start typing in workflow, I'll go to expression, workflow, open close parentheses, then I hit a period, I can get all this different data about the workflow, and that'll be the specific flow run. So every time this runs, it's going to get this data about the workflow. And so that's what these workflow actions are doing. It's getting the tags and going into the environment name. So that's the name or the environment of our flow run. And then we're adding onto that URL flows, and then the workflow name and the specific run and the workflow run name. So don't worry if that doesn't make any sense. All you need to know is all you have to do is control copy this and come in here, go like that, and there. Now it's going to work. And so basically, well, right now that's just some text, right? But it is going to calculate that. The URL is going to be this big old long thing. So if you want to make that link look a little bit prettier, check out one of our blog posts actually on our website talking about how to include different email links, making them look good inside of a flow. So that's actually one of our blog posts on our website if you want to learn more about that. But for now, that expression, pasting that in, is going to bring that URL for that specific flow run. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing. Of course, always leave me comments or questions down in the description below. And I believe that is everything. So hopefully that is useful to you. If it is, consider liking the video. And if you'd like to see more content and be notified of future content, hit the subscribe button. Also, if you're interested in learning more about Power Apps, we have a Power Apps course all about building a time tracking application step by step alongside with me on our website. So check that out. I'll put a link for that course down in the description below. I believe in the month of February of 2021, it's only $30 right now, so I'd check it out. And that is about it. Let me know any questions, and thanks for watching.